2, 1.
And welcome back to Spark 21 Ireland and Northern Ireland regional conference. We're into the final, to the end game now, as Dr. Strange says. The final panel of the day, roundtable with a bunch of student editors from around the country talking about running a publication during the pandemic and giving us, a look into some of their fantastic insights and experiences working as student journalists, because we, of course, we're the Student Publication Association, and we should be talking to student journalists because that's who we represent. So I'm not sure how we're going to do this, but we're going to go around the table now and introduce everyone. Try and do this alphabetically. So I guess the first person then would be, if I'm right, Lauren. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Lauren, so I'm the editor of Trinity News in Trinity, and before that last year I was the deputy editor of TN, and previously in the news section as the news editor, and I've also done some work with some other student publications in Trinity. So I was involved with TN2 magazine, which is like the arts and culture magazine. I started in that as a deputy theatre editor, and then went on to be the editor and the deputy editor of that. And I was the chair of the Trinity Publications Committee as well. So I've done a few different things across. That's
an impressive CV. Okay, and then who's next? I guess it's Riv. I hope I said that right.
It's Reeve, but it's okay.
Reeve,
You've got pretty close, yeah.
The flipping fathers.
I know, it's a tricky one. I'm Reeve. I'm the president of the Writers' Society at Queen's, which has, founded and published the Apiary Literary magazine this year. I'm an editor and typesetter of the Apiary as well.
Okay, who's next? All right, who wants to go next? I'm not calling names anymore. How about Matthew? How about you go next?
Sure. I'm Matthew Moynihan. I'm the editor-in-chief of Motley Magazine, which is UCC's flagship magazine. And there's two Moynahans here today, and it's a very rare name, and we both work for the same publication. So Stephen is my deputy current affairs editor, but he's also the editor of the current.ie. In terms of my own experience then as well, I was radio journalist of the year in the S Medias last year, and I write for the Evening Echo as a freelancer. So yeah, that's me. I also, I'm currently trying to grow a lockdown beard, but it's not really working, as you can tell. So
I just shaved mine off. So we're coordinating. Since he called your name, do you want to introduce yourself, Stephen?
Sure. So I'm like Matthew said, I'm the deputy current affairs editor at Motley, and I also have my own publication, the current.ie, and I'm a student at UCC. And I was the podcast officer for UCC Journalism Society last year, and we had a small podcast there. So yeah, that's basically my journalistic life in a nutshell.
It's impressive given you're only in second year, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Who's next? Fiona, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi. So my name is Fiona. I'm the editor-in-chief of University Express in UCC, and I've been working with University Express for 3 years now. So I was previously arts and literature editor. Fantastic experience. Learned a lot. A lot I didn't know about arts and literature. And before that, I was online editor, and that was when I got my start in journalism. Something I never thought I would fall into. I never believed that media was for me. So this was a really happy coincidence and a really happy 3 years.
Whoa. I don't know what that was, but the Cork fam are taking over today. And finally, Caitlin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Caitlin. I'm co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Apiary, which Reeve is also co-founder of, and it is a small student literature magazine out of Queen's University Belfast for emerging writers.
Fantastic stuff. So we have people from both sides of the border today, and very looking forward to speaking to you and hearing everything you have to say. So let's kick it off then. I'm going to grill you all. We're going to play a game of 20 questions. No, we're not. No. So to start, Thank you all for being here today. So how is everyone, and what's going on with your publications at the minute?
We're pretty good. Yeah.
We're gearing up for second issue at the minute, which is interesting because we've decided to take an experimental turn. After so now, instead of doing a traditional submission period, we are in conjunction running a competition in which we are only giving our writers one page to kind of just leave everything there, and that will be turned into the second issue of the Apiary.
Ooh, very, very, very inventive. That sounds cool.
So the key at Motley this year has been to temporarily for this year with COVID-19 move fully online. So we've basically secured funding from the university for a platform called Issue for the premium version of that. We're building a new website. We're about to head into our 4th issue. But really, I suppose COVID for us has been more of an opportunity rather than a challenge. I feel as though it's going to benefit the publication in the future because we now have like a medium term plan in terms of transitioning from 70-30 print to online to 50-50 print and online. But also as well, I think that the fact that COVID-19 has meant that everyone is stuck at home, being stuck at home, we've also been able to like secure bigger interviews because people aren't going off on tour. You know, they're not as occupied, right? So essentially, yeah, I feel that COVID-19, although it's been a really, really major challenge for society, for our publication in a specific sense, it's been a large opportunity.
That's a good way to look at it, like especially with like the fact that we are, you know, we are all so divided at the minute. I think like especially for student media, like it's really important, you know, like to give students, you know, that taste of actually being in college, and you provide that service like all student journalists do, and it's brilliant. Sorry, I'll shut up.
Oh, and just coming in on Matthew's point, where he said that it was seeing it as COVID-19 as an opportunity rather than a challenge. I completely agree with that, and that's how we're approaching it in University Express as well. For every challenge, there has to be an open door. There has to be an opportunity there. And what COVID-19 has really brought for student publications and for University Express, but for publication in general, is not, shall we say, not bringing the literature. We're not bringing literature to digital anymore. We're letting the digital embody the news space. And now that sounds very confusing, and it probably is, and it's a hard thing to wrap your head around. But we're now letting, because digital has become such a big part of our lives now, everything is wrapped around it. So if you can imagine the internet in the palm of your hand, news is in one space, social media is here, Facebook's over here. There are millions of things that the digital can do for us. And that's what social media has brought. And that's what COVID-19, should I say, has brought to us. And I think it's going to be an interesting future for publications.
That's a really good point. And that's, we are going, oh shit, dipping 3. That is something that we're going to come back to as later on in the conversation. But it's good to hear that you're managing well, and that, you know, and that you're like Matthew, you're treating it as an opportunity, which I think everyone should be doing at the minute. Like how are things at Trinity News, Lauren?
Good, yeah, I feel similarly to what Matthew and Fiona were saying about particularly around digital. Like I've really enjoyed expanding the way we use social media this year in a way that we've probably had more time to, I guess, because what we did a lot in the past with our social media was covering live events on our Insta stories, and that was always a really fun way of showing students like what was going on at society events or protests. But obviously those aren't happening now. So it's been fun looking at how we can kind of create content to go on our social media, and how we can share like the articles that our writers are writing for the website onto social media and things like that. Just to have that opportunity to look at things in a different way and do different things is nice. We're in the middle of a production weekend at the moment as well. We've been lucky enough that we've been able to keep doing our print issues We've reduced the size of our print runs, but there are still a lot of people living on Trinity's campus and going into the library. So it's been really nice to be able to still print those issues, to have them on campus. And there's like staff on campus as well who like to see it. But similar to what Matthew was saying, we've been publishing every issue online as well, which we didn't do in previous years in the same way, whereas this year it's every issue goes online. And it's been really nice as well seeing how much people are engaging with the digital versions of the issue. It's a really interesting year in Trinity in general because Trinity is electing a new provost this year. It's almost like electing a pope. All the staff vote and vote again until there's only one person left in a kind of knockoff style situation. And the candidates for that were just officially announced yesterday. We're in the thick of that now. It's definitely an interesting year. It would have been great if that was able to happen in person. It would have been really great to cover that live, but it's still interesting covering that online as well.
So you've got provost elections and SU elections at the same time. Wow, you're gonna have a busy couple of months.
Yeah. That's all I've thought about over Christmas.
Oh, God. I don't envy any of your news editors or writers, that's for sure. It's nice to have stuff to write about, especially in lockdown. Stephen, your publication is unique because it's fully online. So, what have you guys been up to?
Well, just mainly for the moment trying to get a regular publication schedule set up.
Yeah.
Because it's always difficult when it's kind of a one-man job and whoever will help me. But yeah, that's the main aim at the moment. I think I've LGBT plus activist Ronan Baldwin, he's a friend of mine. He's continuing a history of the LGBT movement
brilliant
series. He's coming up with that soon, I think. And yeah, I have a few ideas in the pipeline. It'll hopefully be more regular from now on. Yeah, and with Motley, it's
it's like having two children and having to pick your favorite, isn't it?
Yeah, so Motley kind of took over in the last September, my editor role there, but hopefully get more balance now going forward. Yeah.
Is this your way of telling me you're quitting? I'm joking.
Oh, I did not mean for this controversy.
I'm not announcing my resignation at all. Don't worry.
Be a fantastic way to do it, though.
As publicly as possible, like.
Oh, brilliant. Well, it's nice to hear that you're all busy and that you're all you're all doing like some interesting stuff, especially given, the pandemic. Speaking of the pandemic, and this is where I get into the real tough questions. Naturally, the past year has been one of the toughest in living memory for quite a lot of people. And of course, that's going to have had a big impact on, everything, including student media. And like you all mentioned, you're not, most of you aren't in college and most of you have had to switch to a digital focused plan for the time being. So what have been the biggest challenges you've had to learn to overcome in your role as editors? And how did you adapt to overcoming those challenges? I think Fiona said she had something she wanted to mention about this, so we can go straight to Fiona.
You made me think of something actually that I'm actually doing for my for part of college that I'm balancing with this. Which it's obviously a two-way thing. Being a student, being involved in student media, but when approaching this job, and I'm sure every single one of us on this call, we all knew that it was going to be different. But I was reminded of a philosopher named Alvin Toffler. Interesting fella. He was a futurist. And I love futurists. I think they're the people who think into the future and who see things that I probably haven't thought about, but that make me think. And then that send me to bed, and I probably won't get much sleep after I watch a futurist because I probably be thinking about what they've been saying to me. And I was looking up a quote that I have in one of my essays. And this is one of his most famous ones from his book, Future Shock. And it's tomorrow's illiterate will not be the man who can't read. He will be the man he'll be the man who has not learned how to unlearn. And that is what really resonated with me, I suppose, walking into this, because we knew coming into September, or I knew coming into September, that this was not going to be a normal year. We couldn't rely on the print version of the publication. We couldn't dispense news that way. And while it's important to write news and write news well, dissemination of news is nearly just as important, because we need to get to our audience. So that was the real challenge, how to make the connection between the journalist and the consumer.
That is such a fascinating point to me, because recently Reeve and I have been talking about how we don't know how to edit unless we're in a pandemic. The magazine started over the summer and continued throughout this first semester, in which the Stormont pulled us in and out of lockdown more times than I can count. I think in the process of editing the magazine, I saw Reeve in person 3 times, but I would be on call with her for an hour every day. And now we're looking at next year, because vaccination rollout was going so well in Northern Ireland, and Reeve is leaving next year, but I'm staying on. And it's the question of, how do we edit a magazine when we're not trapped inside constantly? And we're going to have to unlearn being little hermits and being on our MS Teams calls with blankets over our head, discussing the writing people have sent us.
Yeah, I think unlearning things, I think it's probably one of the best things you can do.
Oh yeah.
Because how great is it to find something else and find a new way that works, and works in a more efficient way?
Well, I feel
because it's
really
efficiency
lucky.
you're striving for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like in terms of that unlearning thing, I feel really lucky in that when I became the editor-in-chief, my role before that had been in social media. So I had written for the magazine and stuff, but I hadn't had a purely editorial role. And because the decision was made in May, I had to build the team over the summer, but we were in the midst of the pandemic at that point. And that really meant that all of the team coming in, they didn't really have to unlearn anything. We just had to create like a complete new culture at the magazine. And it seems to be that year on year, some things kind of linger on and some things are kind of scrapped away with, and there's like a natural progression. But yeah, like I think the biggest challenge has been like maintenance of team morale. So like I would have seen last year, we would have been able to have in-person engagement, because we're remembering we're student publications. So like we want to be broadsheet quality. We want to be the quality of like contemporary published magazines, but also it's a huge social outlet. So trying to maintain that kind of team morale was probably the biggest challenge this year. Now, how we've overcome that is I've specifically set my deputy editor with the task of working on that sort of thing and holding meetings. And just last thing to note there off of that, student journalists, we all want traction, right? And this is the one year where going viral is certainly something we don't want to do. So it's been a weird year. That's the only way to describe it. But I suppose the best way for any publication to deal with this is to accept reality as it is and adjust yourself to it instead of kind of wishing for the reality that was before. So I do find what Fiona said and Caitlin as well, just around unlearning and relearning, it's an interesting point.
I think what I've noticed most this year is kind of like what Matthew was hitting on. It's not the act of writing an article itself, it's everything else that goes on around that. So like for just sitting down and writing an article, it's the same thing that you'd been doing previously. It was just sitting down, typing, getting the words on the screen. It's the social element of giving, especially new writers. I feel really bad for people who are starting college this year. I'm really glad I'm on the other side. Trying to find ways of like helping people to like make friends in the paper and trying as best as we can to replicate that social element of it. But also we have say like we would have like right, we would have like multimedia teams at TN. So we have like our photo team and our video team and our podcast team. And those trying to kind of see how we can do those kind of things digitally has been, I think, the biggest challenge, even more so than just the act of writing an article. With our podcast team, where normally you would, go into the office and set up your microphones and record a podcast episode, thinking about how can you do that remotely. And what we've done is, downloaded specific apps to our phones that, let you kind of record podcasts remotely. If you throw a blanket over your head and have your earphones on, and that helps to mute the sound out and things like that, trying to keep the sound quality good. And it's all those things that kind of happen around the act of writing an article. It's like not the actual finding news and writing it, or getting an interview and doing that on Zoom is the same. I think what Matthew was saying earlier about doing interviews, and I think with Matthew, like, and the kind of the broadened scope of like who you can find to interview, I think is really cool. Like, we had, even very early in the pandemic, like one of our writers interviewed a lecturer in Italy when Italy had just been really hit by it, and that kind of changing mindset of like opening yourself up to more possibilities of who to interview. I think there is other things that are lost, maybe. Like, I remember last year I interviewed a lecturer in Trinity once, and I went to his office to interview him, and in his office he had a second desk that had this massive Lego Hogwarts, and like those kind of details to say. Then I took a photo of him and like had that in the background, and that sort of thing, where like, showing that bit of character and like who that person was. I think that's the kind of thing you miss out on over Zoom. But then there's the flip side of like opening your ideas of like who you might interview.
There's that kind of sense of surreality to all of it. The fact that, like, even this conversation, it's just not the same. The ability to communicate, at least, in terms of like vocally, is just not the same, like, it's really interesting. But that's what's great, I think, about the publications, is that the written word, whether it's online or whether it's in print, it doesn't change, right? That the impact of the words don't change. But the impact of, say, this conversation, if we were all sitting together face to face, the conversation would be very different. So I think that's one of the benefits as well of being in print. We're not going to like lose the kind of tone and the impact of the writing, because writing speaks for itself. But in a conversation where you usually have eye contact, nonverbal cues, etc., in terms of podcasting, radio, other forms of journalism and media, I think it presents a bigger challenge.
Okay, those are all fantastic answers. Like, I'm really glad to hear that you are also proactive on overcoming these challenges, not letting them overcome you and your publications. And your publications are thriving even in the middle of a pandemic. That's really inspiring. But something that I'm really interested in asking you, trust me, I know this from experience. I was an editor when I was in college, and I know just how stressful and overwhelming working in like running a publication can be sometimes. Like, especially say like you're having like a row with like college admin, or you have like other deadlines and other responsibilities. It can be really tough to balance everything. And given like, especially with the stress and anxiety caused by the pandemic, I'd like to know how you're all like coping with that, and how you're all like ensuring that there's a clear work life cutoff. Like, I don't know, say it gets to 6 o'clock and you're like, nope, that's it, logging out the email. Like, how have you like adapted to that?
I think that's been one of the most difficult parts of the pandemic anyways, kind of switching off from the whole college journalism life kind of aspect, because it kind of feels in a certain sense that you're always on. There's it's difficult to actually get away from your emails or your even from your laptop, like. So that's probably the hardest thing I found. Yeah.
Boundaries are blurry at best most of the time. Like, we are recently off dealing with the finance office. And I think what you guys are all saying about the online print is really interesting, because we only had enough funding to make the choice of being print or online. And there's a very specific focus on literary magazines being print. It's very important that they are in some capacity printed. And so we had to make the choice to use our money towards that. But we're hoping, praying for online funding next year. But a big part of that is meant there's a huge amount of pressure when you're doing a print literary magazine of how much you can fit in. I cannot tell you the amount of review sessions where we were looking at a piece that we love so much, but we physically did not have space for in the magazine. And after that, we got in the habit of doing breathing exercises on our Zoom calls. And that was how we stayed together as a team. And now we brainstorm things to do on MS Teams calls to calm everyone down. Sometimes we all cook together. We've been brainstorming doing dumb TikTok dances before every review call for the competition. It's things like that. It's trying to utilize the weird absurdness of running a magazine this way and making it even weirder. Just leaning into it.
Embrace the weirdness.
Yeah.
That sounds really good. Like, I really like the idea of team coordinated team breathing exercises. Just so long as you don't do that when you go back to to physical meetings.
I'm not sure I can get rid of it. I think we can attest to the fact that before every review session, I make everyone take a very deep breath in and exhale at the same time.
It's been really useful, actually, because I mean, like Matthew was saying, you don't have those in-person cues, and sometimes it gets a little bit tense, especially when there's like conflicting opinions about a piece. So breathing exercises highly recommend.
There was we were going to do like socially distant walks as an edit. So for our editorial meetings, obviously the Republic went into like level 5 lockdown. This is the third level 5 lockdown, and we've been in it for the last 8 weeks. So that wasn't feasible, but it would have been really interesting. But yeah, so we've adapted. Like we do 2 editorial meetings. But yeah, we're trying to, like, in terms of like I totally agree as well with what Stephen has said about switching off. That is a real challenge. So it's something that I've done myself on my Android. Is the only notifications I get on my phone are WhatsApp. Messenger is switched off, Twitter is turned off. Like the apps are still there, Instagram, all of that stuff, because there's always that kind of blur between work and personal life, and that's one of the issues with socials. And just on, you were talking about like dealing with the college. Myself and Fiona are part of like sister publications in UCC, so we very much like had an attitude of we need to work together to ensure that we can protect the print future of the magazine, protect our budgets, and we kind of collaborated in a way that the Express and Motley hadn't done before, and I think that really helped us, like in terms of bargaining with the administrators in the university. I'm sure Fiona might speak more to that, but
yeah, and it was a new approach this year, and it was something that certainly had been done to the extent that we did, that we have done this year, and I believe it has worked well, and it has worked well for both ourselves and for the administrators inside in UCC. So I think it would nearly be, whether it would be favorable for the university to see it continue, I don't know. It will all depend on how things change next year. But as I reflect on this year and the events of the last year and everything that society, student publications, shall I say, and universities and everything students have had to deal with, it has worked really, really well for us. And yeah, switching off is important. And I would say that to each and every one of my editorial team. Switching off is important. I'm not ashamed to say it. I schedule about 4 hours of my day to kind of not look at my phone and just go away and do a bit of art, a bit of painting, something that brings a bit of happiness to my life. And then I come back to my laptop. I'm one of those odd people, I'm going to say, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. I work well into the evening, and when I say well into the evening, I mean 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, God.
So it's I certainly have the balancing act, and I have the balancing act down. In a way that many people would look at me and say, no, that's not healthy. But no, I have about 4 hours a day that I just set aside, that I
That's good.
don't talk to anybody.
I can just imagine you laying up the paper at 2 a.m. and I'm like, no, I couldn't do that. It's really important to obviously give yourself that space, give yourself that time away from the publication, because I know the publication, it becomes a big part of your identity when you're the editor, because it's your baby and you want it to do well, but you have a life outside of your baby as well. It's like and you need to get that life needs attention too. So very like you said, very important to switch off, to give yourself the time and to do something therapeutic, like laying up the paper at 2 a.m. That's definitely therapeutic. And like, to go back to what Matthew said, like socially distanced doing your meetings and socially distant walks. I can just imagine you walking up Washington Street. Oh yes, this is what we'll put on the cover this year. Yeah. That sounds so bizarre, but that sounds really fun as well.
See, I find that like during exercise or like anything like that, where you're more mobile. I think that, like, for me anyway, right? Like I know that Caitlin's involved in literature, and for me, like when I'm involved in poetry, like the best ideas come when I go out for a run. Do you know what I mean? I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is about exercising. Does it open you up to something? But that was kind of my concept with the team. It was like, well, if we all go on like this big walk, we'll get a rush of endorphins and dopamine and lots of great ideas. And it's all done drug free, so it's which is always a beneficial thing, right? So looking after my team's mental health, but at the same time making us creative, it's been a weird balance, right? Because it's like, how do you balance keeping everybody on your publication happy and productive at the same time in the middle of a pandemic? It's been a hot mess, but it's been worthwhile.
It's just good to hear that you're not all going insane and letting and the stress overtake you. I lost my train of thought. What was I going to say next? Oh yeah. So you mentioned like managing your teams, and ensuring like a good relationship with your teams, and obviously you want to like you're looking like to get as many people to contribute as possible, but that must be really challenging given you can't meet with people, you can't go up to people like on campus and invite them to like write for you. So how have you adapted to like getting both returning contributors and new contributors to get involved in your publications?
I think I found people were actually really eager to write this year, because it was one thing you could do from home. Whereas like there's a lot of things, I guess, with like some societies where like or sports clubs especially, where obviously you kind of need some sort of physical element. But I'd get emails from, like, especially over the summer, people coming into college for the first time saying like, or even people coming back who hadn't gotten involved before, but people who were saying like, I'm at home, I just want something to do. And even when I was even organizing meetings can actually be a bit easier because people don't have as much going on. Whereas last year, sometimes organizing a meeting, like a large group meeting, could be quite challenging. This year, I say to someone, oh, does X time work for you? And they're like, yeah, I've nothing going on. So I found that side of things has actually been kind of okay. It's probably trying to trying to have the kind of fun in it and make sure you're not just only talking about like specific like the work side of it, and trying to like still have like laughs, whether that's over meetings or in group chats or that kind of thing. But in terms of actually people looking to write, I think people have like enjoyed it this year because it's something you can still do and from the comfort of your home.
I think we got insanely lucky setting up the Apiary this year. There's been some journalism done on the creative writing boom that took place over the pandemic. and we're starting to really see the results of that. If you look at the big Irish literature magazines, The Stinging Fly had the most submissions they've ever had in their history this past submission period, 3,400 something submissions of short stories. There were people desperate to get creative writing out there because it just became what their relief was. And especially when we announced that the theme of the first issue was going to be lost summer, and they could write about the pandemic or they could write about something else. They could just write about the summer and this feeling of grief. It just seemed like there was an outpour to want to talk about that. And luckily, the publication's connected to the Writers' Society. We run workshops. So essentially every workshop, we were just saying to all of our writers, like, please, please, please write something. Please write something. We would love to read it. And it's that thing of letting people know that there will be a duty of care given to their work, especially because we're publishing, I think nearly every single writer we published, it was their first publication, or at least close to. And it's that feeling of building a relationship of trust, which was so much harder over a Teams meeting, but we did it. And it was just a mammoth effort on the part of the entire editorial team to do that.
I think that aspect of catharsis is really interesting, in this year, like we're not able to connect with people in the way that we were before. And I think that, leaving your heart out, with ink onto a page is a really, really good way to keep it going. In terms of you mentioned networks and stuff like that. And what it was when I was hiring the senior editorial staff, so the current affairs editor, features, fashion and entertainment, it was really important to me that they had their own network and that they were self-starters. And what I found is that it's created kind of a feedback loop, because they have their own deputy editors, they have staff writers now, and that's kind of expanded. So it's kind of created an exponential effect, really. Where if the content is improving, which it has been, and more people are engaging, given that there's been an improvement in the content, more people want to contribute then. So it's all about starting small, publishing the highest quality pieces, and then attracting people in and developing them, because that's part of our role really as student publication editors. It's not the same as, say, working as the editor of the Irish Times, or that sort of thing. We're trying to mentor people in the same way we've been mentored, and we're also learning on the job as well. That's what's really interesting about being an editor of a student publication. It's both a mixture of trying to develop others, but also develop yourself, so that you're critically aware and critically ready for, the real jobs that lie behind, or rather in the future ahead of us.
And especially this year for us, since it was our establishment year, we were being mentored at the same time. I have to say, the Seamus Heaney Centre at Queen's just essentially took us under their wing. Any question we had, they got back to us immediately. And I have to say, the work of Manuela Moser, the publishing fellow, I think we would have drowned without her. And it was that of, we had to learn all these things on the job, but at the same time, we were being taught them and then trying to impart the same skills so that when all of us are graduated, there are people to take over the magazine. And it's just that it was a very interesting balancing act, because there was 2 months where we were back in Belfast and we hadn't told anyone about the magazine. No one, I remember I was in with another student journalism organization at Queen's, The Scoop. And it was the day after we had announced that we were launching, and Thomas Copeland, the main editor, just looked at me and went, "You kept that a really good secret, didn't you?" And I was like, "Yep," because we didn't know if we were getting funding.
And I think that's a really good point, Caitlin. Making sure there's somebody else to take over, because that is a really good mark of leadership. Knowing when it's time to step down, but also knowing that there is somebody to take over, and there is somebody who you can place an organization's hat, place the organizations in, that you have faith in and that will take care of it like it's their baby, and you can trust with it. And it really is all about developing people, because inertia is the scariest place to be. And I am completely and utterly convinced of that. Even if you take a step backwards and learn a few things, it's not ideal, but at least you've learned a few things. Inertia is scary because you're not moving anywhere. So it's essential to keep that development at, if you can, moving forward at all times.
I think that's a that's a good point. On that point, that's the idea of fostering that talent and ensuring that there's someone there to take over after you're gone. That's really important. Like, I remember when I was interviewing for my replacement when I finished up in college, we interviewed a good few people, but I just I wanted someone I knew who I could I knew who was going to do the job properly and was going to treat the magazine with the respect it deserved. And I'm very happy with who I picked. And I think they're doing a very good job. But speaking of fostering that talent, to anyone who's sitting there now, any potential future editors, future student journalists, people who are, on the fence about whether or not they should do this or not, they're just feeling really, I guess self-conscious about it. What would you say to those people? Because I found when I came into first year, I wanted to get involved, but I just couldn't make myself. And it wasn't until I went into second year that I finally submitted something. What would you say to people who are just starting out, who want to who want to get involved, but they just they need a little bit of encouragement?
Three things, very brief. Back yourself, write, repeat. Back yourself, write, repeat, and just keep doing it. None of us had the confidence going into our first article to think that we were going to write something really good, right? It's just about backing yourself. Backing your own voice as well, I think, is a really important thing. To not question your voice, just write, see what happens. If it's terrible, it's fine. We all start off with really, really okay-ish kind of writing, but just back yourself, write, repeat, and keep doing it until the fear is gone. And your voice then will start to really emerge. And when your voice properly emerges, your journalism is just going to get better and better and better. And you'll be so delighted with yourself for backing yourself. I think that's a big thing, And also, what our role as editors is to back those people as well who get onto us for their first article, for their first commission, and that's definitely what I learned. I had no confidence starting out with this, not with this role, but it's student journalism. But I just kept putting myself out there, and eventually you dissipate any fear that's there, and yeah, it's a really nice process. So that's what I would say. Just back yourself, write, repeat.
I definitely agree, and I would say it's so important to try things even if you don't think even if it's not what you imagine you'd be good at, to try new things, because I know I knew coming into college that I liked writing, but I didn't know that journalism of any kind would be something that would be for me, and certainly not news journalism. And it was only because the news editor at the time happened to say to me, you want to try writing a news article, that I even wrote a news article in the first place, and just found oh yeah, I actually quite like this, and then it just sort of snowballed. So to definitely try things, even if they're not necessarily what you think you'll be good at, because the whole point of a student publication is to learn those skills, and it's such a wonderful opportunity to get to try things without the in a low stakes environment without the pressure that you would find trying to go into a real job.
I would just say, as an editor, I think we just love reading other people's work. I think it's just there's always something we'll gain from it, and even if it's not the best article in the world, I mean, that's what the editor is there for. It's to help you improve your work and to show you where you can improve and show you how you can improve. And we learn from it as editors, where we, in reading someone else's work, we learn where we're going wrong ourselves, maybe in our writing. I think it's just important to realize that there's not going to be any judgment or anything from an editor if the writing is bad or if there's a few spelling mistakes. That's perfectly fine. We just want to read your writing. We want to help you, and we want you to help us, because without other people writing, no one is going to have a publication. So I think I just love hearing from people and reading other people's writing. I just think it's great. It's probably the best part about being involved in a publication of any sort.
And that's a really good point, Stephen. I mean, every day is a learning day. If I go to bed without having learned something for the day, in a funny way, I've failed, because that symbolizes a day where I've probably done nothing. I've probably just sat down on the couch and probably stared at, be it the wall or the television. But if you can write and then even receive a bit of feedback and learn from that feedback, it's okay to question it. Always question, because I've certainly questioned feedback that I've gotten, but keep writing and make sure that you don't lose that confidence and you don't lose the spark that you have, and certainly don't lose the vision that brought you to writing in the first place. There's a reason that you have an interest in it. So don't lose that, and don't lose that vision. It's about little baby steps to get to the big prize. And, you know, it's like that saying, like, you know, how do you eat an elephant? You know, a little bit at a time. And that's something that my father often says to me when I come to him with a problem. And something, again, that it always makes me smile. I can see you smiling there, Caitlin. It makes me laugh too. But I take comfort from that. So how do you eat an elephant? A little bit at a time.
I would say this is a bit odd advice, but find a role model and then realize they were exactly where you were. A big part of us starting this is we kind of looked at the landscape we had, which is the Belfast literary scene. We looked at, there's so many magazines in Belfast. We have the Tangerine, we have Open Ear, and they're fantastic. And we just looked at those editors and we realized they were, once upon a time, they were also undergrads at Queen's with these hopes and ideas of furthering the literary tradition up there. And it was about realizing we could do that too. And I think when you start writing as well, I write poetry, I write prose, and it's quite difficult at times to just keep going with that stuff, especially with the state of the world today. And then I just kind of remind myself of the writers I love who are like alive. I think live writers are a lot more interesting to base yourself off of than the dead ones. And just kind of go from there. Just remind yourself, if they can keep going, I can keep going, and I can also be in that spot.
Yeah, it's an interesting point as well. Like, you know, just building on what Fiona said there, I don't think any of us are able to develop our own voices as journalists without hearing those of others. And Stephen noted that as well. It's that kind of, I mean, by reading the writing of others, we benefit ourselves because we learn how to write better. It's a subconscious thing, right? You know, but yeah, I don't think I would have ever developed my own voice without hearing others first. And so the reading process is always really important, especially if you're a new writer. Pick up a copy of the University Express or Trinity News or The Current or Motley if you're so inclined, and read through it and kind of go, okay, what's coming across here? What are people writing about? What are people interested in? And then what am I interested in? What part of the magazine or the publication did I like, you know? And then find your own voice. I think that's the hardest part, but once you've got that part, you're sorted, because you'll back yourself consistently. I love these awkward pauses.
No, and I think another important part is that I always try to tell, especially young, like new writers, your voice will change. The difference from when, like, what we thought the Apiary was going to be when we started, because I also ran promotional work, we were like, oh, we're going to get so many pieces about like summer and really in depth. One of the most well-regarded pieces in the magazine is about someone who locked themselves in their room every day and watched a 24-hour crab rave on YouTube, and that was like the piece everyone talked about. I could have never foreseen that piece. And it's about that. It's about understanding, get weird sometimes, and especially in journalism as well. Like before this call started, we were talking about weird journalistic articles we had read recently. It's like the weirder ones will draw you to an audience, and often that's where you find your space to find your voice, is in the topics maybe not a lot of people are talking about.
Oh God, I'm sorry. It's quite difficult to coordinate these talks sometimes. That's when you're remote. That's why you get these awkward pauses. We just got a message from a listener, from Callum Connolly, looking forward to Fiona's next issue headline on eating elephants. What a terrible thing to say.
No, it's something to think about.
To be in the editorial, I'd say.
Exactly.
Do you think they can compare the vaccine rollout to eating an elephant?
Oh God. Down here, it's I'd say it's more like eating a rock that you can't get your fork through.
So I'm originally from Dublin, and I'm stuck in Dublin at the minute. And I'm just like, I'm watching with envy as like Northern Ireland just like gets through the vaccine, because the UK is like, okay, we're out of the EU, it's time to hoard the vaccine. Like
the one good thing.
The one forces first move of sovereignty.
Well, it's just nice to see them not arguing over fish anymore and whether a fish is British or Irish. That's it's quite a pleasant way for it to end.
It's been interesting moving to Belfast from Dublin and studying politics full time. Has been a very interesting choice I've made in my life.
Did anyone else feel that collective sigh of relief as journalists at the end of last year? When Biden, I'm kind of into the start of this year, as Brexit was finally over and done with, at least from the perspective of the withdrawal agreement, and that nutcase or narcissist in chief left the Oval Office. I think I actually felt like a physical sense of relief. And I don't know if any of you guys felt the same thing, but to be able to edit stuff without writing about Brexit or Trump is just such a pleasant experience.
Yeah, the talk around this house was kind of like, what are we going to report on? What are we going to hear in the news if it's not about Brexit, if it's not about America? What are we going to hear? So now there's plenty in the news.
That would be a first.
Trump was my respite from COVID. That was like, but now it's like, now everyone's discussing the fact that like GQ is editing Biden with like the same aesthetics that the Soviet Union used for propaganda. It's getting just weirder. We've taken a turn into the absurd, and we've just run with it.
Yeah, it's like a continuing psychosis. We just have to like navigate our way through it. And try and emerge out of our roles of editor as sane as possible by the end of it. But we'll all be a little bit cracked by the experience, but in a good way. We'll all come out the better for having been editors, despite how stressful it is.
Well, I think we can look on this as a very unique experience for all of us. Because every year, editing a publication is unique in its own way, but just the fact the global situation changed so much, and you can argue it changed in waves throughout the year. Like there was never a month where things were exactly the same as they were the month previous, and while processes may have run in a similar fashion, you had to take different things into consideration the entire time. So it has been a interesting juggling process for all of us, I would imagine.
I think that's a really good point, because I think as a newspaper, like you want to be covering things that are new, like whether that's in news or if it's a feature and you're interviewing someone, like you want to interview someone that hasn't been interviewed before, or like interview them about something they haven't talked about before. Or if it's an opinion piece, like you want to be arguing an argument that hasn't been made like that before. And there's kind of been no better year to talk about new things and find new things to report on, because everything is so new. And especially like from the student perspective, like looking at how colleges are handling the pandemic, especially against the backdrop of like a higher education system that has so many flaws, and the funding crisis and all the other crises in Ireland. Then the pandemic just dropped on top of that. And yeah, as Matthew was saying, a lot of say pitches we might have gotten last year might have been around things like Brexit or Trump or big ticket items like that. But then this year it's just totally blown open, like the scope of things to look at, because the pandemic has affected everything in so many ways.
I worry about writers transitioning back to writing about day-to-day news, and especially for us, like we take creative writing, we set the theme of Lost Summer to kind of explore the pandemic. Now we're stuck with the question of what kind of theme do we set in a world where there isn't one big thing that's affecting everyone? How do we start to find the commonality again after a year that has caused so many fractures?
That's really interesting, actually. I mean, in terms of, yeah, I mean, where is the focus going to go? You know, that's the thing. Like, if we take COVID-19 out of the equation, I think it's no longer the new normal. It is the normal. So it would be really interesting from a journalistic and creative perspective, what that's going to do to writers' voices, you know, as we emerge past kind of the vaccination stage. But I guess that's probably a comment and a discussion point for another panel. But it's interesting little dichotomy in its own, like.
Okay, we're coming up on the hour now, so we're gonna be ending it in a few minutes. But just one last question for you all, just for a bit of fun, because I love torturing people. And I asked this to every single person when I was interviewing people for my editorial team during my time in college. If you could interview anyone, living or dead, who would it be and why?
I honestly think I'd interview the dog, because I know that's a really boring answer, but I often just watch the dog going around the house and think, what must this all look like to them? Everyone, you know, normally off, like out all the time, and then suddenly everyone in the house all the time. I'm sure they're delighted, but like, we're just looking at your dog, like, wow, that's like a living, breathing thing, who is oblivious to the pandemic, except for the fact that all its friends are at home all the time, you know.
It would be lovely to live in a world like that.
Yeah, I feel like it would be
No worries.
an uplifting perspective.
We'll get a dog translator in.
I reckon Michael Collins, purely because he did probably not. No, I didn't really think about my answer there, but purely because he was, you know, during the whole process of kind of Irish republicanism and all that, he never really was in the forefront in the media. So I don't think we ever got a real sense of the man. We just get like these kind of stories, you know. But because he was hiding the whole time, and he had to. So just to get a sense of like the man behind all of the kind of political stuff, I actually just mean the interesting kind of character, the personality that he was. But yeah, I probably should have thought a little bit more about my answer, but that would be mine.
My dead is Sylvia Plath, and not to be like a typical literature person, I just want to drink with her. The way that woman could put away alcohol was impressive. And alive, my answer is Ben Lerner. I think the writing he's putting out in the minute, which deals with the intersect of politics and literature, is some of the most fascinating work being done right now.
We don't really do interviews in the aviary.
I love how on the spot these questions were people.
We don't really do interviews, but if I could commission anyone to write a piece, I'd really, Caitlin's gonna laugh, I'd really love to get Mario to write a piece. And it's mainly because we're gearing up to do an author event with Stephen Sexton, who's written If All the World and Love Were Young, which is a poetry collection about Super Mario. And I think that, I think he would have just such an interesting perspective on the world.
Good.
You really put me on spot, Dan. But if I would say Joe Schmidt. I had a lot of time for him when he was the Irish coach of the rugby team there a few years ago. And I think he brought some really fascinating approaches to the sport, not just how to play the sport, but the lifestyle behind it, and the mindset behind it, and the mindset behind of how you work as a team, and how you bring leadership to a team, and the qualities of leadership. Those are the things that really fascinate me, because for a lot of people there are a lot of different things, right? So I'd love to see what his definition of it is. I know there's a few definitions of it running around this house, but I'd love to see. I'm open to new perspectives, shall I say.
If I was going to interview someone, it would probably be Yanis Varoufakis, because I just find his whole conflict with the EU back when he was Greek finance minister fascinating. And I think he has some great stories to tell. And he's so self-absorbed and arrogant. I just think it would be hilarious to ask him tough questions.
I think, is that everyone? I'm not sure. It's been a long day. Well, I think that's going to be that then, guys. I want to say thanks to our fantastic panel for joining us today. It's been really interesting and really nice to hear about all your experiences and learning, what you're doing in the middle of the pandemic, especially going forwards for like future editors who are listening. I think it's been a good event.
Thanks very much, Dan. Have a lovely evening, guys. And it's a real pleasure to put faces to the names.
It was really lovely to get to meet all of you, even if it was over Zoom.
And sorry.
And thanks for a great event, Dan. And thank you all for coming to the panel, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Because it's fantastic to tell a story, but hopefully that this will have inspired some of you, and really go out and tell your own stories. You don't need to tell anybody else's story. You need to be better than the person you were yesterday. That's what you need to go away from here with.
I feel like you should be a life guru.
Oh God, I'd be very bad at that.
Well, but for anyone who's interested, we'll also be having our regional awards. The results will be announced later. We'll be announcing those at 8:00 after the Scottish awards are announced at 7. So if you're interested in seeing who won and and who's taking on the bragging rights this year, head over to SPA Journalism on Twitter, and we'll be announcing it live at 8. But for that brings the SPA Spark 21 Ireland and Northern Ireland Regional Conference to a close. It's been a long one, but it's been really worthwhile, and I've really enjoyed talking to all of you and all of our other fantastic guests. And hopefully, for the next Spark, everyone will be able to meet up next year, and people will be able to see each other in person, because this is really good, and I'm really happy to have been able to do this. But you are missing that human element. And hopefully whoever takes over from me will have a bit of a easier job organizing. Actually, it hasn't been that hard considering we're all at home. But hopefully whoever takes over from me will be able to build upon this and deliver an even better conference next year.
Thanks, Dan. Have a lovely
Thanks,
evening,
Dan.
everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.